Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and today, this episode features a check-in from our friends over at the Sing Democracy 250 project, and we get to hear from one of the two composers that they've commissioned for that music. Now, a quick reminder, we did an episode the first week of November where we introduced you to the Sing Democracy 250 project, and it's amazing. Hint, hint, the application is open by the time this episode airs, where you can apply to be one of the choirs from all 50 states to be a part of this project. And spoiler, if you apply and get accepted, they provide all of the music for you for free. We talk more about this in the beginning of this episode and in the one from the first week of November if you want to jump back and give it a listen. But after we do a quick catch up on what's going on with the project, we talk to composer Bussewitz-Quarm and the song that she wrote called Us. It is so inspiring to hear how the song was written, some of the aspects that went into creating it, and the community building and peace building opportunities that will come from performing this piece. I really love talking to composers, and I think you're going to be super inspired by this one as we see what this project is doing to bring people together into community building opportunities. Of course, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at Perform International. And if you want more, I always give an extra little bonus episode of inspiration over at the Patreon page. It's patreon.com/musicedmatters. It's really fun to do a podcast because of conversations like this, and I can't wait for you to give it a listen. So, an update from Sing Democracy 250 and an inside scoop on one of the original compositions, Us, by composer Bussewitz-Quarm. Today, on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are hearing again from our friends over at Sing Democracy 250 with our friend Tina Sayers, and we have a very special guest, one of the composers from that program. I'm so excited to talk to Bussewitz-Quarm. Hello, friends!
Hi.
This
Good to
is
see
going to
you.
be so great. Oh, I am just thrilled that we're doing a follow-up. We have to, okay, listeners, if you haven't jumped back to the episode, it was released on Election Day 2024, so November 2024. We introduced you to what this Sing Democracy 250 program would be. And Tina, can you give us like a quick overview and an update? How are things going since we last talked?
Right. Things are going well. You know, it's a moving target. And so there are always things that shift and change in terms of dates or when things are going to be released. But at the same time, more of that is getting firmed up. And so as we get closer to our application date opening, which is January 15th, we're just really trying to make sure that people hear about the program and they have answers for their questions. And so that when that application opens, we have a lot of people jumping in to get started. So basically, in a nutshell, I'll just tell you a little bit about the program so we know the context for this conversation if people didn't hear the last episode. And that is that Sing Democracy 250 has three components. One is that we've commissioned two new works for choir and orchestra. One of them is called Redeem the Dream, and that's based on a Langston Hughes poem, Let America Be America Again. And that composition is about 25 minutes in length for choir and orchestra or piano reduction. And that one is composed by Brandon A. Boyd, who is Yay, Brandon!
We love Brandon
who
Boyd.
Hopefully you'll hear from soon on this podcast. and so the other one is called Us, U.S., which has a double entendre, meaning the United States and us as people, right? Which is the composition that you're going to hear about today that Michael wrote. So I won't go into that, but that's the first part of the program. And the second part is that our anchor choir, the Together in Hope choir out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, they are going to be performing this in 4 signature concerts that are being held in major cities, mostly on the East Coast, because that happens to be where the majority of our history is as a nation. Mm-hmm. So we are starting that in Philadelphia in 2025, and we will be doing it subsequently at Lincoln Center and somewhere in Washington, D.C. Place is still firming up. And then another concert in Minneapolis. And those will happen in 2026. So this is all in celebration of America's 250th birthday, which is the year 2026. But then the third part, which is where I come in, and where we're just sort of, this is the big program that's launching in January, is the Sing Democracy 250 50 States program. So the big goal with this program is to get choirs in all 50 states to participate in performing this new repertoire in the year 2026. So the bottom line is that we have 4 pieces that we sort of have required for the program to make the full concert program, so to speak. And that is the 2 new works. The first is about 25 minutes, the second is about 35 minutes. And then on top of that, we want people to sing the national anthem and lift every voice and sing. So that's the entirety of what we require people to perform. And if they're willing to do that between March 1st through December 31st of 2026, then we will provide them the scores for free.
Wow.
So for the new music. So the other thing I want to point out is that we are very interested in groups collaborating. We don't want anyone to feel like they have to take this all on by themselves as just a single choir. So there are lots of different ways to collaborate. You can collaborate by sharing a venue. You know, a university might share a venue with a community chorus, or a high school choir might join in with a church choir. There's all different ways to do this. The only requirement we have on who can participate is that you must be a 501c3 nonprofit, and you must be in the United States. So,
Okay.
so we think those are pretty low bars for most choirs to cross. And so, yeah, we just hope that people will really share resources, maybe divide up which choir's learning which pieces, but as long as you come together and perform them all as one concert, that is totally fine. So with that in mind,
Yeah, now we get to talk about one of the pieces, because
I
the
know,
3 elements are so cool. And the fact that in a time where a lot of school budgets are getting cut, or a lot of programs are getting cut, finding the funding for all of this music is such a great piece. Plus, you're getting to perform tried and true with some new compositions. So I think this is great. Maybe we can get this episode to air right about the time the application opens in
Yes,
January
and just real
15th.
quick, that's right. Thank you. It opens January 15th of 2025, so just right around the corner. But it will stay open until July 15th. So there
Okay.
is a lot of time, but we recognize that most choirs are already preparing their repertoire
For
for
the
the
next year.
next year and a half. So, you know, any time is fine, but the sooner the better, so that you know how to get started planning your season.
That's so cool. All right, Michael, I cannot wait to talk about your piece. But before we dive into us, you have to
Yeah.
tell us about you. How did you become a composer? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I've always loved creating. I grew up. I started piano lessons when I was 5 years old, and I loved improvising on the piano. In fact, I remember, at a very early age, just like sitting in the living room at this piano and playing an F and an A over and over and over again, just a major third, just being in heaven. So I'm very tonal. I drove my family crazy because, hearing the same thing over and over and over again can drive people crazy. But I've always loved creating, and so composing. I composed in high school. I composed. I was a 6th grade choral teacher. Very specific. I was a 6th grade choral teacher, middle school choral teacher for 10 years, and I wrote music for my kids as well. Here on Long Island, and a few of those I've published since then, and so I've always loved composing. After I moved on from teaching, and I continued working at choirs and local churches. I composed there as well, and it's always been a dream of mine to compose like professionally, like for a living. And so at one point, my wife and I sat down, and I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I need to do it full time. I can't like have all these odd jobs, because it's like such a difficult business to make a living with. And So with her blessing, I went full time as a composer, and my first experience was at ACDA in Boston in 2017, no 16. That was it was an even year, so it was the Eastern Conference in Boston. I was all nervous and everything, but I had a table set up, and Mark Boyle came over and introduced himself. You know, Mark. Yeah, and he was just so friendly and everything. And then Ann Matlack from New Jersey came over and took some of my music, and I was like, "Oh my God, somebody's taking my music! They might sing it at a concert." And so, and that's where it all started. And I learned the business over time, and started self-publishing. Then got published by Hal Leonard a few times, and it's been a dream. Like the people that I meet along the way has been with my collaborators and everything. It's just been incredible. I just like it's a heavenly position. I just love
Oh,
it.
it's so cool.
You
And you
know?
can tell from your, like, whenever you're running one of these tables, you can just tell that you love it. I think I remember meeting you at one of those composer, like, walk around meet and greets, maybe at Nationals
Mhm.
in 2017 or something like that. I feel like it was
Yeah,
early. It was super early. But it's
yeah.
memorable because your passion for it is so authentic. And I love that about you. It just comes through that way.
Just this ability to like connect, with people. My experience was one that I was incredibly, incredibly shy, and like just to be able to like share what's going on inside of me, and then connect with people like, hey, I like that's going on inside of me too. Like I understand what you're putting in your music because I feel that too. It was like, oh, just so wonderful,
I
you know.
love that.
So yeah, so it's been great. It's really been
Well,
great.
thank you for sharing that journey. So, how
Yeah.
did you get connected with Sing Democracy 250?
Well, this was like, I guess about a year and a half ago, even longer now at this point. I was on the treadmill on a Sunday doing my exercises, and I got a phone call, and I was like, usually I let this go to voicemail, but for some reason I decided to take it. And so it was Gary and Celia who are the ones who are running this whole entire thing. And Gary Aamodt, is that how you say it, Tina? Gary Aamodt?
Aamodt.
Aamodt and Celia Ellingson. Thanks. And so they said, like, we heard your recording of The Unarmed Child, and we want to hire you to write this piece for the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I was like, okay, so that's when the conversation began. And so we just talked, and it just seemed to be such a good match. And yeah, it just kind of that's where it all began.
Okay, so what stipulations did they give you? What were the walls in which you needed to create this? How did us come out of that conversation?
Yeah, so they had a series of quotes. So there's this book that and Tina, if I forget anything, feel free to jump in as I'm talking.
Sure, I'll
Um
hold it up to show people.
Oh, there's a
yeah,
picture of us. So they're holding a book, and it's called the Bill of
obligation.
Obligations.
Yeah, it's written by Richard Haas. Richard Haas is the president emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations, and he wrote this book because ethics is not really taught in schools as much anymore, and he sees how divided we are as a country, and so like he really feels very passionate about there are things that we can do, like as citizens, as regular average citizens, to bring ourselves together with each other, and so there's 10 obligations that are in the book, and um, so Celia and Gary came up with quotes that kind of speak to each of those obligations. And there are 31 quotes in total. And so their plan was, or their ideas for this piece was to um, make a musically cohesive choral work based on these 31 quotes. I was like, oh my.
Yeah,
I was like,
that
that's
sounds like a puzzle.
yeah. I was like, this is going to be wild. And so it was, what I did. I got the book right away, started reading it, and I researched, these people. I mean, we know all these people, but I wanted to research more about like when it was said and then what conditions and everything. Um, and so uh, I also brought on board my good friend and an oft collaborator, Chantel Sellers, who is a lyricist, a poet, and an author, and she was able to help me break down the quotes as to like what she feels. I'll also backtrack and say that she's Native American and she's also a veteran, a
Okay.
military veteran, and so like she has a unique perspective to the quotes, and so it was like we sat down with the quotes and we really just talked about them and really just sat with them and figured out like what's important here, like what should stand out musically, where's the connections between the different quotes, between Thomas Jefferson and Frederick Douglass and Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan, and like what stands out. And there were certain things that stood out. There were certain keys that stood out to me. Obviously democracy was a really important word in this that came up several times in the quotes. And the other thing that really stuck out to me was something that I felt like I needed at the time, and I also feel like it was all coming through in a lot of the quotes. And it's actually part of the title of the choir, the main choir that's doing the foundational concerts, and that is hope. Hope was just it was a theme through this entire thing, and I feel like that's something that I've been studying a lot about hope lately. I've been like looking at that and exploring the idea of hope in several of my pieces right now. So that really appealed to me a lot, and I worked with coming up with a motive for hope and also for democracy in particular. And so, it just one thing led to another, and I started, music just started coming to, to me with these different quotes.
So the piece, this is wonderful. I love that it's motivic in creation and that there's so much thought and intentionality behind not just the research, but the placement of the quotes. It's a 35-minute piece, if I remember correctly. How is it structured? What is the difficulty level? Tell us a little bit more about that so people listening can get excited about getting this music in their hands.
Yeah, so it's in three parts. The first part of the first part of the piece is called "This Is Our Time," and it's the Barack Obama quote, Ronald Reagan quote. Celia Ellingson also has a quote, a very important part of the first part. And then there's a fourth quote by Max Arst, who kind of transitions to the second part of the song, which is 10. The second part of the song, it sounds like a lot, but they're actually some of them are very quick, some of them are kind of quick. 10 parts to the second. There's how do I say it? There are 10 movements to the second part, and each one is one of the different obligations. The first one being be informed, second one, get involved, third, support of teaching physics. The fourth one is remain civil. Fifth one is stay open to compromise, and then sixth is reject violence. Seventh is promote the common good, and the eighth is value norms. The ninth, respect government service, and the 10th, put country first. And then we end with a call to citizenship. And one of the things that I wanted to do was with the music was to have people experience these quotes, but not like as a list, not in a pedantic way, but as a celebratory way. And this is not being written for. I'm 53 years old. It's not. I mean, yes, there are going to be people of all ages singing this, but it really is. I really hoped my one of my goals was to connect with younger singers, Gen Z, and so there's a lot of different styles here. There's inspiration from not just Aaron Copland and John Williams, but also there's jazz in there. There's Nola Second Line. There's folk. There's modern Broadway and blues, and there's even Gullah Geechee style in there,
Now
like
you're talking about
inspiration
my
from,
part of the country.
oh yeah, all those different styles. There is homage to Ella Shepherd, who was the she arranged the music for what became the Fisk Jubilee Singers, and so there's inspiration from "Steal Away," which was one of the pieces that she arranged
Mm.
for the group that became the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And there's an homage to John Dickinson also. And John Dickinson actually was one of uh, the founding fathers, as they're called, right? And he signed the Constitution. He was one of the signers of the Constitution. He did not, however, sign the Declaration of Independence. And I think that just it's such an interesting story. So the reason there's an homage for him is because he was a composer also. He wrote music. And
Wow.
so he was in the discussions about creating the Declaration of Independence. But because he was what was he? Was he a Shaker? He was a Quaker. He was a Quaker, and so he believed that he was one of the few that were representatives that were meeting at, I forget where, but it was in Philadelphia. I forget what the hall was, but it was in Philadelphia, and he believed that discussion was still really important. To be part of, before declaring any kind of independence, because he was afraid of the bloodshed that was going to come. And John Adams, everybody's like, we need to declare independence now, and which of course they did. But I thought what was really interesting is that by including one of John Dickinson's songs in this, like just the melody line, it's not any words or anything like that, just the melody line. I thought it really was interesting to bring up discussions about how we don't always agree with each other, that there is conversation and discussion, and sometimes there are arguments, and they're both really, both sides, it's really important that that there is that, rather than everybody just blindly following each other, or expecting people to blindly follow. And so I just thought that was a really interesting little thing to include in the piece, so that that conversation can be had. Like, why John Dickinson? He didn't sign the Declaration of Independence, yeah, but he actually was part of the discussion and the arguments and stuff. And so so there's a melody of his in there too, which kind of stands out because I have a little piccolo part in there that sounds like a fife, so to speak, so I kind of worked that in.
Oh, that's really cool.
That's really cool. Do you have all of these fun pieces? Are there program notes at the beginning of the piece that will tell us all of this?
Yeah. I mean, yes, that still is a work in progress. I definitely have mentioned the different styles that'll be in the beginning. In the front matter, there'll be it'll mention the different styles, so that still is a work in progress to develop that. The submission was November 15th. It's December 2nd as we talk right now, I think. And
so close, it's brand new.
Yeah, I mean, so the
press.
vocal score, exactly. The vocal score was actually in September, or was it July? I don't know. Everything's gone by so quickly. But the orchestration was just November 15th. So it's submitted. And so, so the front matter is being put together, but it's still, still edits going on. Yeah.
This is so cool. So do you expect, I know one of our favorite things when we work on music by living composers is talking to the composers. Are you going to be popping in on different rehearsals? What are your hopes and expectations of engaging with this piece and the many choirs that are about to embark on it?
Well, I sure do hope to. I think that that's always a part of these projects that I love. Just being able to interact with the choirs, share what went into creating it. Talk about for example, there are several. I mean, several of these quotes, we don't have recordings of them, like Thomas Jefferson or whatever, but we have recordings of Barack Obama and George Bush and others saying these exact quotes. And so I actually like listened to their speech patterns and worked on like creating their like figuring out what pitches and what rhythms they're using in order to create. Barack Obama's amazing at public
Yeah.
speaking, and so I use that as inspiration to create some of the melody lines, some of the solos and whatnot.
You
Just
transcribed their spoken words.
yeah,
That's so
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Because they had certain emphasis on certain things. Sandra Day O'Connor is another one. They emphasize certain things, and it's like it was, I thought that would be cool to kind of bring that to life through the music. So these are all things
So
I want to
very cool.
share, like democracy, for example. I think it was FDR. Democracy, the way he says democracy, he has that kind of like that kind of unique sound to his voice, and so that became the motive for democracy, that kind of thing. It's kind of like inspired by the way FDR actually said that word, which is a really
That's such
important
a
word,
cool Easter
especially in his
egg.
time. Yeah.
These
So
are
I
like
love
the
sharing
best
these kinds of
nuggets.
things. Yeah, yeah. So
Yes. Oh, this
I'm
is
very
so
excited.
cool. So, will you be present at some of these concerts?
I think so. That's all still like I feel like we finished this first stage, this first phase of creation, that really, was everything in my life, for the last year and a half. And so I know that, Tina has been working tirelessly, and Jonah's been working on this, and Celia and Gary, blood, sweat, and tears to create make this thing happen, and this project come to life. And to be honest with you, I've been focused on the music creation itself. And so I'm really excited to have the conversations about what's coming next, because I was like, just like, you know what, when I work on a commission, the focus is intensely on the music creation, and it's like all the conversations can wait till after that. So so it was submitted November 15th. Then we had Thanksgiving, and
Yeah.
so now those discussions are
down
just
the
beginning.
pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so fun to be able to see a composer's reaction, even at like choral conferences when they perform
Yeah.
something and the composer's in the room. It just changes everything. I just did an all state where we had 3 of the pieces had composers that were in that state. And it was so exciting to see the difference and it was 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. The energy level when they sang for the composer of the piece.
Yeah, right.
Was amazing.
No bigger motivator than that, right?
Cool. I mean, I was nervous to conduct in front of a couple of them. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, here we go. But it's just so cool to see that. I hope that we can make that happen.
Sure.
And Michael, I want to know, like, because it was so recently turned in, do you feel like you had, how do I say this? Do you feel like you're pleased with the product in the sense that you had enough time to make it what you wanted, and that I know there were probably some new challenges, as there are with every commission. There's some piece of it that maybe is a new, um, something that you haven't done as much, right? So maybe there were pieces of this composition that were challenging for you. So do you feel like do you feel like you had kind of the time and the resources, and did it all come together the way you hoped it would? Or do you feel like, geez, I wish I'd had another month? Or 10?
Well, so no, I'll tell you, when I said yes to this back in April of 2023, I think it was, after the first conversation and after some careful thought of like, okay, what am I getting myself into? I was like, okay, 31 quotes. And I was like, how do I make an experience out of this? Not just music, but an experience. Because I've sung, and I can't even really give you titles, not because I'm trying to withhold titles, but it's it's more just like, I've sung things that felt pedantic or I felt like I didn't connect with. I
Yeah.
mean, I've sung
Mhm.
amazing, like just powerful things that I felt really in tune with and in touch with. And I knew their goal was to connect with young singers, with Gen Z. And, and so I was like, okay, how do I take these quotes from people who were alive 200 years ago, from things that were like, that we don't really think about, like the teaching of civics, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, the idea is if we break them down and we really look at these quotes, they connect with everybody, we have
Mhm.
so much in common at a
Mhm.
time when we're really like made to focus on our differences. We have so much in common. So my idea was like, all right, we have these quotes, and um and so how can I bring those to the singers so they can feel them, so that they can experience them, so that they could sit with them and 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 digest what they're saying, really feel what they're saying. And so, you know, I it was a big challenge, and I was really like overwhelmed for maybe like the first 3 or 4 weeks. And then when I brought on Chantel, things were started flowing. All I needed to do was talk out loud and for her to share her thoughts also. And it's like, okay, and there's a lot of things that I started writing that, don't sound anything like what I originally wrote. But because things developed into things that were, I hadn't realized were going to be there, like these ideas, these motives and stuff like that, really started coming together. And the cohesiveness of like progressions from the beginning and the end, and,
Mhm.
certain things like going from a C minor to an A flat major, comes back in, several different places. So I feel really good about where it ended up. And I'm so glad that I had a year and a half. That was definitely like so important to have this become something that we can dance to. The other thing I
Mhm.
didn't mention that I feel is really, really important too is that my goal is that no two performances will be the same.
Ooh,
Okay.
okay.
Oh,
So
really?
so yeah, so
Oh,
I
this
mean,
is
just
fascinating.
like the Constitution is a living, breathing document that has amendments and grows over time. I mean, it was not perfect in the beginning by any stretch
Hmm.
of the imagination because it didn't include everybody, and we're still trying to better it. I also feel like this experience of, this great American experiment is one that, has um uh you know we there's call and response sections that symbolize like listening to each other and collaborating. There's
Mhm.
certain spots where I put a melody line for a soloist or for an instrumentalist, and I put ad lib optional so they can play the line that's written. But if they feel something inside that they want to express, they can, go to town on that,
That's
and do what
cool.
they want to do. There's dialogues between the choir sections, between the choir and orchestra, between orchestra members. There's exchanges between the
Wow.
soloist and the choir, and there's even a spot where the audience is invited if the conductor wishes to do this for that performance. The audience is invited to sing along in one of the movements as
I
well.
love when that
Wow.
Um,
happens. I just love
so
that so much.
yeah, I mean, look, maybe it's the church part of me that's like, I always need a break every once in a while, and I like when the congregation has a break and you get to sing like a hymn or something like that. You kind of active participation. Sometimes after a long sermon, that's really necessary. So, in the
I feel
middle of this, not that this is churchy or anything like that, but in the middle of this, there's also that option for the performance to have the uh that my dog is crying outside the door.
it's okay. Mine
The-
mine is snoring. I'm hoping you can't hear it.
there you go. Nope, can't hear it. But yeah, so there's this option for the audience to sing the words peace, and I am peace, and it's that's right in the middle, and then there's kind of like the end of like 2-5 movement 2-5, and then 2-6 to 2-8 is like really jazzy and it moves a lot, and people hopefully feel like moving, also like dancing a little bit, like
Yeah.
where they're standing. Just I feel like that's a nice break in the middle, to kind of just like wake people up and get people excited.
Mm.
So yeah, so there's a
I
lot of
love
jazz
those
in the middle of
insights.
this.
Well, I was going
Yeah.
to say
So cool.
31 quotes, and the piece is only about 35 minutes long. So that's a lot. It's like a quote
Right.
per
Yeah.
minute.
Exactly. Exactly. And in the end, I didn't want it to be just like, pushing out quotes and
Yeah.
not developing them in any way musically. So that was definitely a challenge, and definitely I used all 18 months
Sure.
to get that to be something that would fit in the 35 minutes, but was not but would be interesting. It wouldn't, there wouldn't be
Hmm.
something where it was just like spitting out quotes without really developing, without really thinking about them. I mean, there's some that go by a little quickly. Um, you know, Barbara Jordan's quote, I love that quote. I actually used her exact like speech like patterns and stuff to create that section. It's in the middle of a jazz
Mm.
section.
Mm.
And it just kind of like is a break out of nowhere. And the whole entire choir sings it in unison. And it's which one is the Barbara Jordan quote? Hold on one second. Let me just see if I can
This is
find it really
it's
quickly.
so cool while you're looking. That's just to hear these insights and
Mhm.
how things can grow and develop, that it's okay to just get something on paper 18 months ago, that doesn't have to be the end, that you still have time to work on something, and to hear that you're proud of what you submitted is just so cool.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like I said, it needed those 18 months. And, I mean, we're going to go into the performances in 2025. We have one of the performances. And, I plan to, like, in rehearsals be like, all right, let me revise, not massive overhauls, but, just kind of like adding even more or whatever, maybe more in the orchestra than the choral parts. But there's always, when is a piece ever completely done, right? I mean,
Never.
is it at the downbeat of the first performance? Yeah, the Barbara Jordan quote: "A nation is formed by the willingness of each of us to share in the responsibility for upholding the common good." And
Mm.
it's a powerful quote, promoting
Hmm.
the common good. Another one that I really connected with was the Io Tometi quote: "Civility is the recognition that all people have dignity
Mm.
that's inherent to their person, no matter their religion, their race, their gender, sexuality, or ability." And so that is kind of that style that I really went to town with that one, because I love that quote so much and I connect with it. And I think Gen Z probably connects very much with that as well. So I wanted to make that special. And so it's kind of like inspired by like the no last second line kind of performances and jazz performance, and the orchestra actually sings along to like this repeated kind of
Yes,
"all people have
please.
dignity, all people have dignity." So
Oh,
so there's a
I
lot of
love it.
interaction, there's a lot of like creativity. The idea is to have this be a celebration and no two performances alike.
Wow. And
Wow.
what a beautiful full circle moment there, going back to the very beginning, Michael, when we got to know you as a composer, and just the authenticity at which you approach and the passion at which you approach composing. The fact that we'll be able to know which of those quotes you were really resonating with at the time of the composition, that will be
Mhm.
such a fun exploration. And then what great conversations. I'm a huge proponent for conversations in choir. We're a community first. We
Mhm.
just happen to
Mhm.
sing. And so I just love the conversations that come about with high quality lyrics. And it sounds like these are going to be some really dynamite conversations.
Yeah, that's my hope. I think that the idea of community is just so incredibly important. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Um, it's I don't know what else to add to that. I agree.
Well,
It gives me so much hope too, because the focus of this project has always been to inspire people to become more engaged in our democracy and in our community as Americans, right? And it sounds like I'm already so excited to hear it after listening to you, Michael, and to see it kind of coming to life as what this is going to look like and sound like and feel like is really exciting. I'm thrilled because it's like you really did capture what the goal is of this whole experience and this whole project.
In the most recent ACDA Music Journal, Benjamin Berge, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He has an article called Music Dialogue, Empathy, Theories of Peace Building in Choral Education and Beyond. And he mentioned this word that Dr. Johann Galton used in the 1970s called peace building. And it refers to an active engagement of making and sustaining peace before, during, and after conflict. And John Paul Lederach, this is all in Berge's article. He wrote about conflict transformation. And he said that it has a framework. Number one, create common good. Number two, build empathy. Number three, create conditions for constructive dialogue. I feel like that's what we do in choir, just like being together, creating a common, like building empathy by being together, by creating, it is a condition for a creative dialogue. Douglas Lung was actually, he's 27 years old. He's a baritone in Cor Leone. And in an article in actually the Chorus America's journal called The Voice, he said, it makes me feel emotionally capable of being a human being, and I can listen to other people better, And so like there's all of these things that I'm hoping, come from this project, because we're so divided right now. People within their own families are divided from each other. And we have so much more in common that we just don't realize. And I think that these foundations that are mentioned in, Richard Haas's Bill of Obligations, these foundations, of being informed, of getting involved, of, remaining civil, staying open to compromise, like all these things, I think we can all agree on them, if we just focus on the foundations of what connects us.
Well
I
said.
love that. I would normally ask you at this point, what's the one thing that matters? But I think this idea of creating common good, of building that foundation for these, what was that word that you quoted? Peace transformations? Peace building.
Peace building. Yeah. Peace building.
Oh,
it's beautiful.
Creating the space for that. It's so beautiful. I think that encompasses so perfectly the thing that matters here is there's a program that's been created to create a space for common good so that we can use the art of being together as choral singers, of putting on concerts as lovers of choral music that can then hopefully create a space for common good and peace building.
Yes.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Oh, this has been so fun. Michael, what a joy to finally have you on the podcast.
I'm so thrilled.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks
Tina, thanks for putting this together. We will loop back again at some point and see how things are going. But listeners, you want to tune in and you want to get ready, fill out those applications. They go live January 15th, and I'll make sure everything you need is in the episode notes. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Take care. It was so nice meeting you.
So what'd you think? Peace building, community building, conversation starting, God, the power of choir and choral music. How fun is it to hear about big projects that are coming up and how composers approach composing and creating and what that does for us when we internalize and create that choral music. I'm so excited that we're in this profession together. Something that I do want to add, just so you know, that piece that Michael wrote is intended, she said, for high school vocalists, but with some challenging moments. There's some moments of repetition to help with the learning process, but one thing we wanted to loop back and make sure you had was that it is okay from high school all the way up, and that I can't wait to get my hands on it. Anyway, if you want more, you can always find me on the socials. If you want extra episodes, you can find those at Patreon. We're super thankful for our friends over at Perform International for sponsoring the podcast. And now, in case no one has told you today, you matter. We all know that music matters, especially new compositions and really cool projects. And I'll see you next time.